Well, welcome, Brad, to the Moms of Tweens and Teens podcast. Great to have you here.
Great to be here.
Well, we are going to talk all about college and financially preparing and scholarships and financial aid and so many of those topics right now parents are thinking about, and they might have a junior or their seniors getting ready to leave. And I told you, oh my gosh, when I was reading about you and listening to your podcast, I'm like, we needed you before our kids went to college. We've had three. Our youngest is a senior in college, and so many things that we did not think about that you talk about. So I want you to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. And I know you have three kids, and so.
Yeah. So I have a podcast out there called Taming the High Cost of College. It's found at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, how original, where we help families plan and pay for college. And that's been my focus for about the last 15 years now, where I've helped families individually and I've building courses and I've got all kinds of free resources. So that's how I kind of got into the podcasting world and started, learning about it personally, and just loved podcasting personally. So then got involved in creating one, and here we are today. And then of course, my own children, my oldest now is a freshman in college. So now I actually have to eat my own cooking, so to speak, where I've got a freshman in college, a senior in high school, and a freshman in high school. So we're in the midst of college planning ourselves on top of everything else.
Okay. Wow. So you even have a new perspective having a freshman in college.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I was thinking as I was reading and listening to your podcast, how often parents that I work with are so focused on their kids and their grades and getting good grades and getting into that, that college and their ACT scores, and if they're doing their volunteering and all of those things. And yet this seems to be a area, the financial piece of it, that often gets kind of swept under the rug. Do you find, is that your experience?
Oh, absolutely. Right. So I meet a lot of parents of sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and mostly juniors and seniors, who realize that there's a lot of work to do around planning and paying for college, not just getting accepted, but all the other stuff of having the right test scores and visits and figuring out what it's going to cost. And it seems to work a little backwards in that for a lot of families, you don't really know what the final price is going to be till you get to the very end. So it's kind of like if you went to a car dealer and they didn't really, they had stickers on the cars, but they were all outrageous, right? So that car's 200,000, that car's 100,000. And then as you start, test driving, they say, well, don't look at the sticker price because, the federal government's going to give you some help, and we've got loans and we've got all these different ways to help pay for the car. So then you would ask, well, what does it really cost then? Well, I don't know. Let's, we'll figure that out at the end. Decide if you want to buy it first. Decide if you want to go through all the hassle, and then we'll tell you what it costs. And I think that's the big challenge that most families are up against. And one of the things that I've been figuring out and helping with is getting a price ahead of time. You can, in the junior year, figure out at least approximately what a college might cost. So now there's kind of two steps to the process. The first one is find a college that net cost will be reasonable for your situation, whatever that means. And then the second part is, well, we're still going to have to pay some. So how are we going to pay for that efficiently? So if you can find a low cost school, or maybe your local state schools are low cost, that's one strategy. And then once you decide, okay, well, I'm on the hook for 10 or 20 or 30,000. Well, how do I raise that money? Is it loans? Is it saving and investing? What are the different ways that I can come up with that and actually pay the bill? Most of the time I hear things like, well, we don't know how this is all going to work, but what we do know is we don't want to put a bunch of debt on our kids and we want them to get a good education. And that's about as far as it gets initially. And then I was like, well, what does that mean? What kind of school are you really looking for? And then what resources are you willing to spend? College has been getting more and more expensive. I think the good news is that's kind of the history of college. I don't think it's going to continue to grow like it has been, because it's gotten expensive enough now where it's becoming an impediment. So a lot of colleges are realizing that they can't raise prices, or if they do raise prices, they have to raise scholarships to go with it in order to continue to attract enough students.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the show is just to raise our awareness around this, because I know even for my husband and I hate to say this, but it was like our son played Division I baseball, and he was recruited by William and Mary, expensive school, state school, but out of state, it's expensive.
Yes.
And he was a catcher, and they had a position open, and he said yes, and he hadn't gotten a scholarship, which probably could have gotten that, but it very specifically, he was a catcher. And so but it was interesting because he did end up getting a scholarship and working towards it. So that worked out. And I want to talk a little bit about that as well. When you're in the process, just become aware of thinking about finances first,
right?
Rather than backwards, which is what we did. I'll just be very transparent here, which our kids got super excited about a college, and we went and looked at it, and then they want to go there.
Yes.
And then didn't really think so much about the cost. Kind of, I think we're in a little denial, not really thinking about that. And so didn't ask important questions until we were like, our nose was to the grindstone, right? We'd already said, yes, you can go here. What would you recommend to the parent, kind of like us, that now they kind of decided that where their kid's going, and now they're like, oh no, what have we done? Our kid wants to go here. They've been accepted, and now what should we do as far as financial aid, maybe looking into scholarships? Is it too late?
Well, it's not too late, right? So I guess the challenge is doing it with intention, or just, again, sometimes things just fall together and you don't realize how lucky you were. Like you gave the example of your son was a catcher and they needed a catcher and everything lined up, which is great. But for a lot of people, they might have said something like, well, we don't want to, that's not the school we want to go to. We're going to go to this school over here. But if they don't need a catcher, you're not going there, because the coach has a say in that as well. So I think for a lot of families, yes, you kind of shop around, you fall in love with schools. And I think what you really need to start assessing is, what are your options? And is this a reasonable option, and can you make it happen? I think for some families, you're going to need to take out some loans to make any college work. And that's just the way the finances are going to work out. But for other families, you might be in this position where, well, here's a school that costs, $20,000, which we can pretty easily afford because we have some savings or can afford to pay or whatever it is. But here's another school that they really love, and it's 50,000. And now you've got to do some soul searching of, am I going to tighten the belt and really spend an extra 30,000 a year just because they like it? And again, a lot of times the parents might like it too, but what's the reality? I mean, what is it, and I always tell people, ask your student to try and articulate what it is that they're going to get that's so good at this school instead of that school. Because we've kind of trained our kids, especially those of us middle class, upper middle class, right? Where our kids are 10 or 12 or 14 or whatever that right age is now. And they say, hey, that iPhone super duper is, really cool. And the next birthday or Christmas, there it is.
Yeah.
And then they get to be 16 or 17 and we're tired of dragging them around all over the place. And they start dropping hints like, well, we should have another car, because then if I had a car, I could take myself to work, or I could take myself to sports, and you wouldn't have to drag me all over the place. And of course we agree, right? We're tired of it. So next thing we know, a used car shows up that they get to drive. Okay. And now they're looking at college, and if, to their mind, it works the same way, right? Just drop a couple hints. Hey, I'm going to college, mom. And they assume that you're going to shake the money tree somehow and make it happen.
Yeah.
They don't understand the difference between a $500 phone and a, $5,000 or $25,000 car and $100,000 or $200,000 college education. To them, it's just big numbers. They don't, it doesn't really mean much to them. And I think that's the big challenge that, we're kind of set ourselves up for. And especially depending on the schools that our kids go to, a lot of times there's, that peer pressure where, there are kids at your school who can go to any school because mom and dad do well and they don't care what it costs and they're going to write the checks. And now there's, and other families at the same school are a little more cost conscious and less willing to just say any school, any price. And I see this a lot. I mean, it happens a lot behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So if when you're on that social media and the college reveals is now a thing, where your student has some social media post with the sweatshirt of their school of choice or whatever it is, and there's this need to have bragging rights potentially on what that sweatshirt actually says.
Yeah.
And sometimes that,
The
sometimes it's
pressure is
important.
on. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, the reality is some parents can't afford to send their kid. If you're giving up BMWs and driving Toyotas so that you can send your kid to an expensive college, well, okay, that probably is fine then, right? Because you can afford to do it. But if you're giving up retirement or robbing your 401k of hundreds of thousands of dollars to make college happen, now maybe you should, think twice and see if there's a good alternative.
Yeah. I like that. So start thinking, moms that are listening, like even before you start looking at colleges, how much you can spend. Is that
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, what are you willing to spend? Just become aware before you even take them to that expensive private college.
Correct.
Although, talk a little bit, because I think that's a myth that if you go to a state school, or correct me if I'm wrong, if you go to a state school, it's going to be less money than going to a private school. True or false?
Uh, False. Not, I mean, certainly it could be, but it could be the opposite as well. I've seen many families go to a private school for about the same price. That's not unusual at all. Where, the local state school is say 25,000 all in, and you can go to a local private for somewhere between 20 and 30. So the costs are very similar, sometimes a little better, sometimes a little more. That happens all the time. Occasionally you see the situation where the local state school is 25 or 30 and the private school is 10 or 5. That doesn't happen nearly as often, but if it does, great. But that's, 1 in 100, 1 in 10, and your students being recruited for something like athletics, or maybe they're a really, really strong student and they did well at the science fair and they're going to win that one scholarship that covers everything. And there's only one of those at that high school or at that college. So if you win it, then your price is great. But if you don't win it, then your price isn't so good. But you decided to go for it and see if you could win it. And I think that's the challenge is there are schools out there that for many families will be competitive. There's schools out there that may cost a ton. And then the rules changed, as an example, the high-end prestigious schools don't offer any sort of merit aid, which means if you can afford to pay the 80,000 that it costs based on financial aid formulas, that's what it will cost.
Yeah.
And a student that's strong enough to get into those top schools could be a very strong scholarship recipient at a lesser school, however you'd say that. Again, it's not a bad school, it's just not the Ivy League or the very top school, right? I mean, they'll still get a great education. They'll still do wonderful things in their life, most likely. But and both schools are 80,000, but one school says no aid. And then one school says, well, based on your academics, you're a strong candidate. We'll give you a $40,000 scholarship. So it's net 40. And then sometimes I see it go the other way. Again, those same prestigious schools where they don't offer much aid if you can afford to pay are extremely generous if you need it. So I've seen that happen where you can get into these $80,000 schools and get a $65,000 or $70,000 scholarship So you're net 10, and you're like, well, gee, I can go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford or whatever, pick your name brand school for less than the local state school because of the aid that I qualify for.
Okay, so let's say beginner 101. You're talking to me and I've got a junior and I'm
Mhm.
maybe in sophomore. People are start sophomore year, maybe even early. I talk to some moms, or they even start earlier. But what would be kind of the first steps that you would recommend as you're
Right.
looking at colleges?
Right. Yeah. So I have a course, and one chapter in that course is um, figuring out what your price to beat is. In other words, what would your local state school actually cost? Doing some preliminary pricing. So if you took a typical, say, an average state school is 25,000. Most students can borrow 5,500. Assume they can work for 3,000 in the summers or weekends or whatever it is. So put 8,000 on the student off of 25, that leaves, 17 for the family. So that might be the price to beat. And just say, well, okay, so it's going to be at least 17, based on those particular numbers. And then when you're looking at some of the private schools and some of the other places, you can kind of start feeling them out and understanding what type of scholarships they offer and how close they might come to that. And again, I'm not saying your sole goal is to, find the lowest cost. I would say a better way to think about it is the best value. If I'm going to spend more money, hopefully I'm going to get something for that more money. And again, if you can afford to just say, I want the prestigious school and I don't care what it costs because I'm doing well and I can afford it, well, great, then go ahead. But for many families, it's kind of a cost benefit analysis, except it's really hard to understand the costs and it's really hard to understand the benefits till you get to the very end of the process. And that makes it hard. There's always this thought in the back of our mind of, well, was there a better option out there? We only looked at 7 or 10 colleges. Would the 11th college have been the one that was actually a better cost? So it's, learning how the process works, I think I would say is, sophomore and junior year, that's a great time for families to understand need-based aid and understand if you're going to qualify, understand how merit aid works and if you're going to qualify, and then scholarships.
Okay, so let's say I hear that and I feel totally alone. I mean, totally overwhelmed, and maybe
Mhm.
alone in it. Totally overwhelmed by it. I mean, of course, that would be where talking to somebody like you is so helpful. Where would you start? Do you call the school? Do you? I mean, you can take your course, but
Right. So, right. So the first thing you can do is you can go to my website, and I've got every state there. I've got a chart where it shows most of the popular state schools and most of the popular private schools in that state and what they cost based on certain incomes. Now, this is data that the colleges put out there where, so if we looked at my state, we've got University of Wisconsin, Madison, which technically, there's all kinds of University of Wisconsins, which most people have never heard of any of them except Madison, because that's the flagship. That's when people say University of Wisconsin, they mean Madison. But you could go to University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, or University of Wisconsin, Platteville. There's all other choices. But that school is about 26, 27,000 all in. And if you look on the chart, you can see if your income is between 1 and 25,000, your net cost is actually about 8,000. Well, how did that happen? Well, you could qualify for some sort of need-based aid or merit aid. Again, and this is on average. So the average person in that category, that's what they paid. And the average person in the 110,000 plus paid 26,000. So they paid almost full price. Why is that?
okay.
Well, because they didn't qualify for much of the need-based aid, and there's not a lot of other aid. Now, if you look at a typical private school, let's say it costs 65,000. And at the very low incomes, it might cost you 8 or 10 or 20 as compared to the state school. But even at the 110,000 plus income, it's still only 40 or 30 or something less than 60, substantially less, because just about everybody gets some form of scholarship at some schools, and not all schools are as generous as others, but again, that's a good place to start and say, well, on average, people in this income bracket, this is the average price that they paid.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. To be able to look at that, that definitely helps.
Right. And
Yeah.
that gets you started, right?
Mhm.
Chances are you're not average. But that's the next step, right? Is to figure out, well, if I'm not average, am I above average or below average? And more specifically, am I above average or below average at this school? Because some schools are looking for baseball players and they're very generous. Some schools don't even have a baseball team. So, you're going to strike out there for sure.
Yeah.
Some schools, just launched a history major and they're being generous for potential history students because they need them. Other schools, all the tuba players just graduated. So the band director and the symphony director is in the recruiting office saying, we need tuba players desperately, start offering them more scholarships or something. Cause
Yeah.
symphony doesn't work without a tuba.
Yeah. The scholarships were taken but then they're like, you can earn a scholarship. So he did that, which was good.
Right.
You run into that too. And then our daughter, who goes to a private university, ended up that things changed with finances and we're like, we need you to try to get a scholarship. So she's going into her junior year. Well, she found out about a scholarship for leadership. She talked to the financial aid office and the scholarship office, and she got it. And that really helped,
Right.
And so those are things like, I just want to encourage parents to think outside the box, that there are things that you can do that you might not even know if you don't ask.
Right. For sure. Right. Scholarships is another big topic, and it's also quite confusing because there's different types of scholarships, but nobody does a lot of differentiating when you see it in the news or whatever. Like not too long ago, I saw a headline where a student was accepted to 126 colleges and he had 4 million in scholarships. And it's like, well, yeah, if you apply to enough colleges and they all give you 20,000 off, well, eventually it's going to add up to millions.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. You can only go to one. And because you got scholarships from a whole bunch of other colleges, you can't spend their scholarship at the college you attend. You're only going to accept one of those scholarships. So that $4 million number is completely misleading, right? I mean, he has 40 choices of $100,000 scholarships, but he's only going to get one of them. So if he picks one, he's not going to get the rest.
Yeah.
So even in that situation, college is not free. So that's where I think there's a lot of confusion. But in general, there's scholarships from the institutions we're attending. And that's where we get into the need-based aid and the merit aid and the different things there. And then there's what we would call private or outside scholarships, where Coca-Cola offers a scholarship and Bill Gates offers a scholarship. And those Buick, they offer the big ones, but so does the business down the street of your high school. The ice cream shop across the street from the high school gives away $1,000 a year because they make all their money from the high school kids. So they chose to do that or whatever, right? So there's all kinds of other outside scholarships. You can spend those at any school, right? You get a scholarship from Marquette or from Harvard. That scholarship has to be used at Marquette or Harvard. You get a scholarship from Coca-Cola or Buick or the local business. You can use that scholarship anywhere.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. So how do you find out about that? I mean, I think a lot of parents assume, oh, my kid, maybe they're not a great student, they can't get a scholarship. And so you don't even ask the question. So, where do you go and how do you begin to even think about, well, maybe my kid would qualify. I should look into this.
Yes. So absolutely. Right. And again, there's different levels of scholarship, right? So the Bill Gates scholarship and the Coca-Cola scholarship, those are highly competitive. You've got to be the rock star to win that scholarship. But if you do, it's very generous. And it's a good thing that you applied and won. But like the Coca-Cola, it gets somewhere in the neighborhood of 90,000 applications from across the country, and they award 250 scholarships. So, and if you go look at it, these are the kind of kids that end up going to Harvard and Yale and other high-end schools, and they want to be doctors and lawyers, and and they've done stuff already. They've got something in their scholarship application about the charity they started, or that they are the movers and shakers of the class. So, and if you are a mover and shaker, by all means, put your hat in the ring. But there's also the scholarship, one called Stuck on Prom. And that is sponsored by a duct tape company, Duck brand duct tape. And they essentially, if you create a prom outfit out of duct tape and wear it to prom and take your picture, if they like what they see, it's like a $10,000 scholarship. Now, even that one is a little bit competitive. They get, 1,000 or 2 entrants, I think, or more. And if you look at the winners again, they have some duct tape talent. They've made some pretty amazing things out of duct tape. But if you have duct tape talent, by all means, go for it. But if if your senior comes stumbling down the stairs one day and says, "Oh yeah, prom's tonight. I was going to make that duct tape thing. I better get to work." Well, I think you need to go to the website and look at what it's going to take to win. So there's all kinds of different types of scholarships out there. I've got a quick resource, Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents, where it's 4 quick videos to kind of get your feet wet, to learn about the different options, and then give you the basic hierarchy of, you certainly want to look for scholarships at any college you're attending. Because again, it's not, you don't have to look far and wide. There's only a couple phone calls or a couple, an internet search or 2, and you can look and see, and either you find them or you don't. When you say, well, my student's good at archery, let's go look for scholarships around archery. They're out there. And so now, but it's also wide open, right? Where you could search the internet for hours and hours and hours and maybe find some and maybe not. And if you just put in 1 more hour, maybe you found another one, or maybe you've already found all of them you're ever going to find. It's like shopping for a mortgage or an airline ticket, right? When you always like, if I just spend a little more time clicking around, maybe I can find an even better deal. Eventually you say, I think I've done the best I can do. I'll just go ahead and buy this ticket and be done with it. And yes, maybe if I keep shopping, I could have saved $100, maybe not, but it's that same thing with scholarships, right? Is I've looked for 10 hours. I found these 10. Is that enough? Or I've looked for 10 hours and I haven't found any. Again, it depends on, again, if your student has unique things, again, they do well, they compete at the state level on archery. They've got a black belt in judo. They're an ice skater, whatever, all those types of things you can search on. If they have, there's things out there for cancer survivors and women in engineering and all kinds of different things. So it's wide open. But if you're saying, well, show me the scholarships, let me describe my kid. He's plays football. He doesn't start, but he's on the team and he plays some of the games. And he's got a solid B average, and he's pretty good at Xbox. It's like, there are scholarships for that kid, but there's also 1 million kids qualified for that same scholarship. So now your competition is kind of stiff. So if you can find a way to narrow it down, that is always helpful. Another great example, while we're on scholarships, there's a scholarship somewhere in Florida. There's 4 counties. Broward County comes to mind, and a few other counties, where if you're going to these particular nursing schools and you come from these particular counties, they've got some crazy generous scholarships. Because, if I had to guess, it was because they're short nurses in those counties and would love to get more nurses trained. So they've got these great, and if that fits you, right? If you happen to live in those counties and you happen to be pursuing a nursing degree, it would be very frustrating to discover that there's all these great scholarships. You just didn't bother to look.
Yeah.
But that's 4 counties in Florida. To my knowledge, there's nothing like it necessarily anywhere else in Florida. There could be. Again, I haven't looked extensively, But I stumbled across that and said, wow, if you know, and that happens a lot. Some wealthy alumni passes away and they set up a scholarship at a particular college. They say, well, this is in honor of my wife who graduated in education, and she came from Milwaukee. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to say education majors from Milwaukee are eligible for this full scholarship. And it's just this random thing where, if you happen to be coming from Milwaukee and attending, St. Louis University, let's say, and you're studying education, all of a sudden you get a shot at a scholarship, and maybe you're the only one, or maybe there's only 3 or 4 of you.
Yeah, because if nobody's looking,
Right.
is
Exactly.
aware.
Right, exactly. So there's all that kind of stuff, but that also can be a rabbit hole of a lot of time and effort. And so I've seen a lot of parents talk about it, but they never actually do much with it. Again, because it's a lot of work, and when we talked about, well, when should you get started? That would be a great example of why you'd start earlier. Is I had a family, they applied to 41 scholarships. They won 7 for $39,000. That's a great story any way you look at it. Now, but if you think about it, how long does it take to do 41 scholarship applications? This is not something they knocked out in one Sunday afternoon. This was many Sunday afternoons. And in this situation, the parents helped. And hopefully they didn't write the essays and that kind of stuff, but they did, organize stuff and keep track of deadlines. And, all these scholarships have a unique, make 3 copies of your application and mail it here, or fill out this online form over here and do it electronically, or, again, so all the different things you have to do, hopefully they helped with that and they helped find them. Again, hopefully they didn't do the stuff the student was supposed to do. But that was a large family project. And if that's something you want to pursue and you think it'll make sense, well, then you got to get started your junior year or sophomore year even.
Yeah.
And then a lot of cases, maybe your student isn't even ready. But as a parent, you can start thinking about it.
Yeah, and looking into it, because it's stressful as is, just getting your kid to fill out applications. Kids
Right.
can drag their feet. Parents are like, I know very few out of the hundreds of moms I work with that's kids have just been, I'll fill this out, and they get it all done in a timely manner. They're usually scared and
Right.
having some resistance there, even though they do want to go to college, and they're dragging their feet and their parents are, on them and riding them. So starting earlier.
Right, exactly. And to be fair to the students, right? I mean, raising tens of thousands of dollars is something they've never done before. And searching and finding and applying to scholarships is something they've never done before. And it's not like they don't want to do it necessarily, but they're busy, right? They've got AP this and AP that, and prom is coming, and they've got college applications, and they've got lots of stuff. And so the time they do spend on scholarships, a lot of times they're not very effective because they don't really know what to do or how to do it.
Yeah.
And that's where, a parent being involved, because, you might be able to get the ball rolling at least a little easier. Again, parents are in the same problem. They may not know what to do and how to do it either. But if your idea of getting scholarships is every other Saturday morning when you see your students say, hey, you get to work on scholarships, it's your job. If that's the extent of it, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a stressful situation. But if you're willing to, sit next to them and strategize, or, again, watch my scholarship guide, it's free, give you some pointers, watch that together, and then talk with your student and decide, well, is this something we should be pursuing? And again, and there's levels to it, right? You're probably going to, no matter what, pursue scholarships at the colleges you're attending, and probably no matter what, scholarships at the high school you come from, because those are all relatively easy. But once you get beyond that, now it gets to be a much wider potential search, and many families end up just paying instead.
Yeah.
It's quote unquote easier.
Yeah. But what I'm hearing you say is doing something rather than nothing is important. Just even if you go look at the college, how many parents do you know that really will go and make an appointment to go meet with the financial the financial aid office.
Right. Exactly. Yeah,
'Cause you can,
exactly.
yeah.
There's so
Mhm,
much you can do. It's really figuring out what you should do. I
mhm.
tell people you're going to pay for college in three ways. You're going to pay for it with money, with time, and with stress. Right? There's a limit to how much you're going to do because it just gets too stressful and you're just going to say, it's just not worth it. There's a lot of variables around, what your family finances look like for need-based aid, what your academic profile looks like for merit aid. Are you interested in the local state schools? Are you, again, many kids are like, well, I don't want to go to anything local because it's too close to home.
Mhm.
Like, okay, well, now we just added an extra layer of, well, all the schools that we might apply to are going to be road trips, or, is it going to be 3 hours away, or is it an airplane flight?
Yeah, that's another expense.
Exactly.
From
I
a
just,
yeah, from a parent that's kids have gone away, you have to factor that in too.
right, exactly. And I've worked with families with twins and quads, and I just recently talked to a family that has twin juniors and twin sophomores.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like they're going to have 4 kids in college at once. And it's like they're going to have to economize. They can't go 4 different directions. Like if you were, a parent of one student could maybe go to all 6 colleges on the list. But if we have 4 kids with 6 colleges on the list and they don't overlap at all, well, it's nearly impossible to visit 24 colleges. The sophomore year, is a great time for families to figure out the financial side of things. Again, your student may not be ready to talk about college, but it wouldn't stop you from figuring out what the local state schools look like and what they cost, or what the local private schools that you might consider. And it might be time, and if your student's ready, so if you have a junior right now and even a sophomore, start laying out some plans and say, our goal is to, as an example, I tell my families all the time, your goal is to have a working school list by the end of the junior year.
Okay, that's good.
Right. These
Yeah,
are the 5 to 10 schools we might be applying to, or 3 or 5, I don't know what the right number is, but these are the schools we're thinking about. Maybe we'll take one off and add one, but these are schools, and ideally these are schools that you've at least visited or done some virtual work with. You've done some preliminary pricing, so you know that the price will be reasonable, whatever that means for your situation. So that when you roll into the senior year, you have a new list to work on. Now you're applying for financial aid, you're applying for admission, you're doing all kinds of stuff, that ideally you do early in your senior year. And if you're still trying to visit schools and you have no idea how the financing is going to go, and you're doing all that on top of applying, and again, it can be done. Lots of families do it because they don't know any better.
yeah,
I talk to a lot of parents that have juniors, and when they start having to take the admissions test, the ACT and SAT, all of a sudden they realize it's coming fast. So if you have a sophomore or even freshman, start thinking about it if you can. And you can divide it into what I call early stage and late stage.
yeah,
So if you have a 6th grader, that's early stage. Maybe we should save and invest. Maybe we should figure out some budget, that kind of stuff, but it's way too early to pick majors, schools, any of
yeah,
that stuff.
yeah.
That's all. That's what early stage is about, is the parents get their life in order around college. Late stage is even if you've done a great early stage, and let's say you have a big pile of money now because you saved and did great, and you're still going to have to do late stage planning, because now it's testing. Are you going to take the ACT, SAT? Are you going to do test optional? What's your strategy there?
Yeah.
Visiting the colleges, filling out the financial aid forms, picking colleges, all that stuff has to be done whether you've done a great job saving or not. So that busy time, for a lot of families doesn't start till end of junior year. And I'd like to recommend that you, at least by the beginning of junior year, start, hit the ground running if you can.
Well, so this is so helpful, Brad, and just all that you offer. And if you're for parents that are, whether they're in early stage, late stage, tell them about your resources, because you have so many resources on your website and you have courses, and they can reach out to you and yeah, I'll help.
Mhm. Yes.
My pants are on fire. I just want to be, I'm in the early stages and I want to make sure that I'm prepared wherever they're at. I highly recommend they go to your, your
Right.
website and check stuff out. So tell them, how can they find you? And then I'll put
Right.
it in the show notes.
Right. Yeah. So everything is available at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. So there's actually a tab called resources. That'll get you to the price of colleges by state that we mentioned. I've got an EFC calculator that can help you with need-based aid, scholarship guide for busy parents. There's a link to that as well. So a number of resources are there. My podcast, another great thing to do is just, while you're folding laundry or, in charge of the carpool or whatever, listen to a podcast or two and learn
They're
about
good.
all the other stuff that you're just going to have to learn about.
Well, thank you so much for what you're doing, because we do need help. And I think when you do get help, it holds you accountable too, to do
Yes.
it. Because it is overwhelming.
Right.
I mean, at least it was for my husband. It can be an overwhelming process, and getting that help can make a huge difference.
The challenge is, you know quite a bit about college now. Unfortunately, all that knowledge is not real useful for you anymore because your kids are done.
Yeah.
So
the tail end.
exactly.
My husband's like, this is the last check we're going to have to write.
There you go. Right. So now you're the expert, but you don't need it. Where you really need it is up front when,
Exactly.
as you're rolling in.
It would have saved a lot of, money. And I mean, we got a little support, but when I saw everything that you offer, I was like, boy, that would have just been so helpful.
Yes.
So, yeah. So thank you again, Brad. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.